Hey, how's it going, everybody? Ernest White II here with my buddy Matt Kepnes. Did I say it right?
Yeah, you got it.
Okay, because I usually just call you Matthew,
Yeah.
Matthew Kepnes. But man, you have been on the scene for as long as I have, that's many, many moons, and yet you still look young, fresh, uh,
How are
and
you?
just
How are
oh,
you?
thank you, man. But you get around. You have been around, and you continue to get around. You just released the newest edition of Travel the World on $75 a day. It's an awesome way for people to just make world travel affordable, make it something that is accessible, that is a real part of their lives. They can get out there with the notes and the tips and the tricks that you offer in this book. So thank you, Matt, for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me, Ernest. We have known each other for a hot second.
We have, man. And listen, I know some of the stories, but I would love to get into your origin story for those who don't know. Tell us about how Nomadic Matt got started.
Oh yeah, we're going back in time. In my 20s, I quit my job to travel the world for what was supposed to be a year, and then that year turned into 18 months. And then when I came home, I really didn't want to go back to corporate life. I had taken the gap year between a graduate degree and what was going to be, corporate career, climbing the ladder stuff. But I didn't want to do that. And so I started the blog in 2008, just as a way to get freelance writing work. You could make 50 bucks, 100 bucks doing online articles at the time. Um, and so it was enough to keep traveling. I taught English in Asia, and the end goal being, maybe write for the Lonely Planet or one of these other guidebook companies. We really knew, but I just didn't want to go back to corporate life. So I started the blog, went back to Asia, taught English, and built this up on the side. And then around 2010, end of 2009, early 2010, I was making enough money where I could just travel full time on that. And so I stopped teaching English and just went all in on the website. And, here I am today. Like, there was never any grand plan. I never was like, I'm going to be a travel writer. I was like, I just want to not go have a real job. And then, a year or two goes by, then it's like 2011, and I'm still 12, 13, I have a book, and then just TikTok. And then 17 years later, I'm still doing it.
Oh my goodness, man. Well, listen, if you are nothing if consistent, and if not consistent, should I say, and you have been consistently cranking out stories. I don't tend to like the word content because it sounds very much just like filler.
Yeah.
You used to write about your own personal experiences as well as offering service information for how people can have some of these awesome experiences. You've been able to pivot as this kind of travel media has changed over the last couple of decades. But even before you got into all of that, tell me a little bit about, man, where you grew up and what your relationship was to travel in your early days. Like, what was your earliest trip that you could remember?
Yeah, I grew up in Boston, the suburbs of Boston. My family were not big travelers. We would do the quintessential summer road trip from Boston to Florida. Um, or go to my mom's family is from Long Island, so we'd go there. But we didn't really travel, like no big trips. We did a cruise to Bermuda when I was like 11 or 12. Then when I was in high school, we also did another cruise around the Caribbean. But that was it. Other than, okay, we'll drive down to Florida, stop somewhere on the way, like, Colonial Williamsburg or Busch Gardens or,
Mhm.
Disney, Mammoth Caves, that all that kind of East Coast stuff. But I mean, it wasn't until I was in college that I even left the country. Well, I'm Bermuda, okay, the cruise counts, but I mean, like, left the country on my own trip. We went to Montreal for a spring break, and then it wasn't until after college that I took a trip to Costa Rica when I was like 20. Let's see, that was for that was 24. Yeah, 24. 23 or 24. I can't remember. And that was when I was like, whoa, travel is amazing. Like now I get why people love vacation so much. Cause like for 2 weeks you could do whatever the hell you want and like have lots of fun activities and eat anywhere and sleep late. And like you were just like captain of your own ship. Now I was like, now I get it. And after that just hooked me on travel. And so I just never stopped.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, man, what do you think it was about travel and about that experience that kind of spurred you into wanting to share this knowledge and share the how-tos with others?
Well, I mean, you make that sound altruistic, but it was not. Like I said, I really just was like, when I came home in 2008, I was like, I want to go back traveling.
Yeah.
What can I do as a job that would like keep me traveling? People had blogs, right? But like, I mean, I had like a blog spot, whatever you want to call it, for like friends and family. People had, you know, Zanga and like Live Journal, these sort of just like diary kind of websites. Concept of real blogging was just starting in 2008. I mean, there were like make money blogs and like, tech blogs, but it wasn't sort of like as we think of it now. And so like, I created the website not thinking like, oh, I'll have a blog where I'll do all this stuff. It was more like, oh, I'll have a space on the internet where I can direct editors and pitches to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, Ernest, you want me to write for your magazine? Here's like my bylines and such. Here's some writings I've done that you can read. Um, so it was really just more about like, let's start so I can have a place to try to get freelance writing. And then, because, I wanted to write to show editors that I could write, I wrote lots of like blog stuff, right? Hey, I did, blogging back then was like, I did this today.
Yeah.
Look at the photo of the sandwich I ate. And
Yes.
people
The
were like, whoa,
proto
that's so
Instagram.
cool. Like, oh, like, you know, um, so it was very much, like journaling. But I also have, travel stories and of my trip, as well as how to find a cheap flight, like, round the world tickets and like how I found a backpack and insurance and all that stuff. And that kind of took off concurrently with how Google search was taking off. And so that did really well, obviously. And so, one thing just sort of led to the other.
Well, listen, even if it wasn't altruistic in its inception, we have still benefited from your desire to make money and travel.
Yeah.
So thank you for being selfish in that regard, man. But that said, you continually show up at different conferences. That's where we met, and just in the spaces where at the time, as you kind of mentioned, there was just this burgeoning constellation of people out and about, digital nomads who came along at a time, in the early 2000s and afterwards, as the technology allowed us to be out in the world, allowed us to start making money in ways that we heretofore couldn't do without being in one physical space, and allowing us to share all of that. And as I mentioned, I said the proto Instagram, the blogging world when we were kind of just starting out, it was very text heavy. Yes, there were photographs and videos that we could add to our posts, but people were reading text. And I
Yeah.
think, that changed with Instagram and some of the other photo heavy storytelling devices slash apps that we have now. How have you continued to evolve as a storyteller?
Um, I'm old school. I still like words and text. But like you said, the medium of preference has changed from text to video, short form video, as well as YouTube is still like sort of the dominant force, even in
Sure.
the age of TikTok. Um, I try to do more social media and try to get into reels, but at the end of the day, that's not how I communicate. Like, young kids they communicate through video. I communicate through text, and so I don't know how to share my tips in a way that's like a catchy video that's like engaging, um, that's got the hook and all that stuff, the way so many of these like newer travel creators can do. So
Mm-hmm.
I just keep doing what I'm doing and transitioning to more books because that's what I really want to write. But yeah, I'm just gonna keep it. I've been doing it 17 years, so like I don't really want to do a pivot. Like I feel like that's like the mid-career shift. Like I'm okay
Sure.
going down with the Titanic if that's how blogging is going. You know, like I've done my time. I still do share stuff on social and and stuff in my newsletter, but um I'll probably go more to, people say start a Substack. And like, I have a Substack. It's called my website. So,
Sure. I mean, I think there's something to be said for just living into the creation that you've already kind of cultivated,
mhm.
and there is enough sky for every bird. There will be
Yeah.
plenty of people who are aligned with your communication style. And I don't believe, yes, there is some adaptation required, as you mentioned, about still having something on social media or a presence,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean you have to start something new every time a new application comes along, or interface. You mentioned that your motivation for traveling when you first got started, or a primary motivation, was to be the captain of your own ship, to be able to be out in the world and do whatever you wanted to do. Has that changed over the years? And if so, how so?
No, this is
Okay.
why I've continued to do what I do. It's just because I don't think I could ever work for anybody else.
Mm,
I do some travel consulting on the side. Um, and some of these clients have joked about like, oh, we'll hire you full time. And for some of them, I'm like, would I? And then I don't think I could because like, even if they gave me like a boatload of money, I still gotta conform to like 9 to 5.
sure.
Like afternoons I run errands. Like I like to work when I want to work. Sure, I can meet any deadline, but like that doesn't fly when you're in a company because like you might have to take this meeting at 2 and 3 and 4 and 5.
Right.
So no, I don't think I could do that.
Well, freedom really is what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean, I know lots of bloggers who, work for other companies and, they enjoy the corporate setting or they like having coworkers. And I think at this point, whatever job I would go for, I want to be well compensated for, um,
As you
given
should
my
be.
experience in the travel field. But any of those kind of like higher end jobs is going to mean a lot of hours. And I don't want to work 50 hours a week.
No, much less, actually, in
Yes,
the
yes.
vein of Tim Ferriss. So, when you think about all of the places that you've been, and I know this is the kind of question that we in the media, travel media specifically, get asked a lot, but what are some of the most resonant places and experiences that you've had on the road?
Well, obviously, living in Thailand, I mean, I've spent close to 2 years living there. Um, I spent a couple of summers in Greece. Living in Paris for 6 months was amazing. Just the whole backpack the world experience, being like 26 and just like carefree and just like living it up, like, I mean, those are glory days in some ways, I mean, all segments of your life have chapters or in their own glory days, but like, I'd say that like 2006 to 2010 4 year period of like just backpacking the world, doing whatever I wanted, being young and carefree, like that's a vibe. That was an
Hmm.
experience, and I think more people need to have that experience.
I agree 100% that no education is quite like travel. And then once that toothpaste is out of the tube, it's you can't put it back in. And so your ability to see and be seen and connect and all of the things that come along with travel, I think, your like pathways have been changed, and the way that you are, even with yourself, I feel like is transformed.
For sure, for sure. And that was happening at a time when pre social media and smartphone, in a way that I think I got the best of the bridge, in the sense that,
Yes.
like, I still had like Wi-Fi and computers and could send emails and Skype people, but I had to go somewhere, and it had to be like, oh, okay, like, new friends I met in Prague, like, let's go to an internet cafe for 1 hour, because we're broke, so that's all we can afford. Do the things we need to do, Skype the family, like, get it all done, upload the photos, and then go out. Whereas, like, now everyone's I mean, how did I survive like 20-hour bus rides? Like, I was just like, you're just sitting there with the book, just, or sleeping, or bored out of your mind. So you got the best of both worlds. Where I think today, so many of these young backpackers are just with cell phones so much that it becomes like sort of a crutch, that
Sure.
they're never fully away. Like, you're not cut off from home the way you were pre-social media, like, or
Sure.
even pre-internet, right? I mean, Thomas Swick, a travel writer out of Florida, wrote this book where he was talking about moving to Poland in the 1970s, and he was just like, see you in a couple of years, and it was just like, you'd get it, like, they send a letter every few months, and it was like, I think even with the internet, parents ordered for me like once a week or whatever, right? Or you'd have like data cards where you'd like phone, like, I got 10 minutes, Now it's just like, just constant FaceTime, or just text messaging.
Sure. No, you're absolutely right, man. I think we got the best. We got the best of all the worlds,
Yeah.
and it was very much the end, I believe, of analog interaction and connection. And
Yeah.
so, but I do believe that then it becomes kind of our responsibility as storytellers, as the kind of keepers of culture, if you will, or culture of a certain time, elders. I hate to say that term just because we're not old in biological terms, but we come from the before times in a lot of ways.
The internet, 5 years on the internet is like 50 years pre-internet, right?
Sure,
Speed up so much.
sure. But we carry some of that knowledge of how to connect with people without without knowing much about them on the front end, and having to be vulnerable and open to whatever comes, would come our way when we were interacting and engaging with people,
Yeah.
which that was part of the whole adventure of travel, the unknown the quotient.
Yeah. You know, it just kind of amazes me how kids are so glued to their phone, in a way. I mean, I guess, like, we're going to be elders here, right? Like, people were saying this about us, right? Like, I always have to say, like, there's old school travel writers who are like, in 2006 being like, I did this when we didn't even have the internet.
Sure.
You're like trying to like Google something, like, learn to be a real traveler, and now we're like, oh, these kids on their phones.
Yes. Kids
So
these days.
you got to check yourself a little bit, but it's still that I think that, you go to a hostel, and, you see all these kids on iPads. It's like, they're not for, like, you went to a hostel 15 years ago. Yeah, okay, one kid's on the computer, two people are waiting in line, two are reading a book. But, like, for the most part, you're just like, hey, like,
I'm here.
what's up, right?
Yeah.
Now, there's no computer, right? Because it's all Wi-Fi, and like three are working remote, with their headphones in. Two are just like FaceTime and so on. Two are still reading a book, and the rest are just out. So yeah,
You're
get off
right.
my lawn,
Yeah,
kids.
get out. Exactly. We're both. I think it's not. It's easy to lean into curmudgeonliness, and I totally get that, because we look at the past even the past heartbreaks and some of these other painful points with a little bit of nostalgia. And
Yeah.
like you said, since the dawn of time. There's been generational divides with regard to who had it better. Yeah,
Right.
we
And
had the
it's not better or worse, it's
sure,
just different. But I would just, I always try to encourage kids to be like, listen,
talk.
just if you can, put the phone down a little
That's
bit.
right. That's right. Well, I think we had better music back then, but and I think that's an objective truth. But anyway, fight me. Anyway, man,
Okay.
so you have, I'm very passionate about that, man. Um, but yes, so we have How to Travel the World on $75 a day. It's your
Hmm.
fourth edition. Travel longer, cheaper, longer, smarter. And so tell us what are some of the major changes that you kind of speak to between the first and the fourth editions?
Yeah, so the last edition, well, the first edition, was in 2013. So obviously a boatload of things have
Sure,
changed. But, the last edition was in 2017. You know, the biggest change is,
pre-pandemic.
COVID,
Hmm.
wrecked travel in the world. And, so many companies that I listed, resources, tools, ways to save, they just don't exist anymore because all those companies went bankrupt. I mean, even ones that have been around forever, like STA Travel, Student Travel Association had been around since the 1970s. They were like just like that's where you went to get like student discounts and deals and cheap flights and all this stuff, and they went under. And so it's just sort of like that was changing. I countries have changed. The country of Laos um, has a train now. They did it in the last edition, and so you update all the like the prices and stuff, but like you have to add in new companies. Travel hacking and points and miles is such a bigger thing now, so that goes in there. Nobody buys around the world tickets, so like we move a whole chapter. Um, so there was just sort of a lot that needed to be changed.
Hmm. In terms of the research, what goes into it, you know, are you by yourself when you do this research? And
Mhm.
what's your process in gathering and collecting this information, particularly if you are dealing with non-English speaking locales?
Yeah, so I mean, the first thing I did was just delete all the things I knew were wrong.
Sure.
So just get rid of all that and see what's left. And there was only like 20% of the book. The story frame is the same.
Sure.
Like the previous editions follow the same chapter, like cadence
Structure. Hmm.
structure. Yeah. But then from there, I just kind of go through and I'm like, okay, I need to add, like, I know mentally what I need to add. So I just kind of write notes and then I just kind of go one chapter at a time. I have a lot of updated information on the blog. So I grab some stuff from that. I expand on it. I grab resources, you write in prices. And then for the research, when it comes to, pricing and everything, I have employees. So like it became a group project of like, hey, you're going to take this destination and I'm going to take this one. And you'll take this one, and then we'll swap to verify that we're all right, and then I'll verify that you guys are right. And so and then so it just becomes a process of just making sure everything is correct. And we you know wrote this book in 2014, 2024. So I'd been traveling a lot, so like a lot of that stuff was like I already knew because I'd
Yes.
just been there. My team knew. And then just you work in the travel industry for long enough, you know where to find the information, who to email, for like food prices in New Zealand. I called up my buddy in New Zealand. I was like, how much does it cost to go do this? How much does it cost to do this? And I call up another buddy and be like, it's my price right for that. Um, I have a team member in Australia, so he helped with the food stuff because like hostel prices are easy. You just look online. Um, but it's the food, and then the ways to save. That's really just like from my own experience.
Sure. Well, then when you look at the many different ways that people can get information now, certainly there's all of the digital platforms that have and search engines that allow people to access information that in previous generations and previous
Yeah.
times you could not get except from the guidebooks that were published. Why do you feel like a book like this is still important now?
Well, this book is less about go to Paris and do XYZ.
Mm-hmm.
That someone may make a YouTube video about, and more about like here's the strategy for thinking about long-term travel, budget travel, uh, and knowing where to look for information, so that if you were to go to Paris, okay, like this is how I make a mental map of like where I go for deals, where I look for resources, what I got to do, et cetera, et cetera. And that, a lot of those general strategies are transferable anywhere in the world, right?
Sure.
You know, there's the destination chapters in the book because, yeah, ways to save in Australia are going to be a little different than ways to save in Europe. So, like, then you focus that. But, like, once you get sort of the mental framework around saving money and knowing where to look for deals, that works anywhere. So it's really about like putting yourself in the mindset of a travel writer or expert to then always be the savviest traveler you can, travel smarter. But it's not a book like, oh, like pick that book up and you're going to find out like what to do in France. Yeah.
Well, let's now look into some of the tips that you might offer people. Um, I see at the very beginning, for example, you try to lean into mindset and you want people to just get beyond their fears. What are some of those fears that generally pop up, and how have they shown up for you in something that you have personally had to conquer?
I would say that most people talk about money as the main factor as why they can't go travel. Um, but I think one of the biggest thing is that just people are afraid, right? You are afraid to leave for the unknown, and um, that's why I focus on mindset, right? If you're buying the book, you're probably already in the mindset, like
Hmm.
you're interested. But you know, and I address this in the book. When we started traveling, we had no role models, right? There was, you got Rick Steves and travel writers and, Bourdain, like Sam Brown, right? But like, you didn't see like thousands of like 20 something year olds like vlogging their way across the world, right? Especially like here in the States where the idea of the gap year is just like absurd. If you're a kid from the UK or Australia, New Zealand, yeah, whatever, your friend's cousin did it. You could ask them. And so like for me, like you have no like framework, so to speak, to work
Sure.
from. Um, no one to guide you. So I think nowadays it's a lot easier for people to be like, I'm going to quit my job and travel because like you've seen a million TikTok videos about it. Your influencers are a thing, right? Like they're in the cultural zeitgeist. People, it's not a fake job anymore. So parents are more okay with it. But still, you're still getting up and being like, I'm going to leave everything I know behind and go somewhere. And there's always a fear there. So like, just I wanted to just sort of address some common fears in that book, so people um, would be okay. Like, like one of the first things I said is like, remember, you're not one, you're not the first person to do this, and knowing that other people have survived this is good inspiration to know that like, okay, like you're probably going to get by too.
Great, great perspective. Man, what would you tell your younger self looking back on all of your travels and just, the experiences that you have lived through? What kind of advice?
Hmm. Hmm. Um, I would tell my younger self, oh man, what's a G-rated version? I tell my younger self now. No, I'm just kidding. I guess I would tell him to savor the moments more. Also, wear sunscreen because you're gonna have some moles. Like when you lived on that island in Thailand for a month, put on more sunscreen, especially on your back.
Mhm.
And maybe drink a little less.
A little less alcohol and a little more
Yeah,
water.
yeah.
Okay. Drink water, wear sunscreen, and most of all, savor the moment. And I think that's the most salient piece of advice that we for life that one could have, especially.
And I would also say take more pictures with the people you were with because you will not remember them so much.
We will keep it G-rated, and we will say,
No, I meant that as a G-rated thing. You know,
okay, got it.
like I'm not trying to take nudes of people. I'm just saying, like, you know, like you meet so many people, right? Like, I wish I took more photos of the people I met. I wish I got more email addresses. You know, like I guess now like everyone just adds each other on Instagram, but like, you know, I mean there was this awesome couple I met in Bocas del Torres in Panama with some friends, and none of us got anyone's email. And so like who knows where there's couples, you know, but we spent an amazing time together that like, you know, I wish we had more time like I just wish like I could catch up with them, you know?
Sure, sure. Well, listen, and that harkens back to those old days before the technology allowed us to create this global community and stay in contact with one another.
Mm-hmm.
You would often encounter people, have wonderful interactions, and then everyone would go on about their way with just the memories to hold.
Yeah, yeah, you have sort of like your 24-hour best friend, you know, for 24 hours it's just us in the world, and then you're like, all right, I'm going to Prague, and then you're like, well, I'm going to Rome, so I guess
That was it.
catch you later.
Yeah, let's catch you on the flip. Matt, how can people find out more about you? How can they order the book? And yeah, how can people connect?
Yeah, I mean, I'm everywhere at Nomadic Matt. So nomadicmatt.com for the website, and then social media, just platform / Nomadic Matt. The book is available anywhere books are sold in the US or Canada. If you're not in the US or Canada, Amazon will ship it internationally. Yeah, Amazon, Barnes and Noble is your local bookstore. If they don't have it, have them order it. Or you can go to bookshop.org, which is like independent booksellers. We'll ship it to you. So all those places.
Excellent, excellent. And last question, what piece of advice can you leave with any of our first time travelers out there, be they in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s? What piece of advice would you leave?
Regardless of your age, first piece of advice is, well, I guess do it because you're only going to live once, but also go slow. Less is more. You're not going to see the entire planet anyway, so just enjoy what you can see as deeply as you can see it.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Especially coming from, someone who has done a lot, who's acquired a lot of experiences.
Yeah.
So I can relate to that. And certainly the longer I am on this planet, the more deep I'd like to go, the deeper I'd like to go with my interactions and connections, even with myself.
Yeah.
Matthew, thank you so much for being here today, man.
Thanks for having me, Ernest.
All right. Everyone, thanks so much for being here with the Fly Brother Radio Show. You are awesome, Matt Kepnes. And looking forward to seeing you somewhere in the world, my man.
We've caught up in many places. I remember we once had a breakfast or lunch in Paris, you know.
Because we are fly like that.
We are fly like that.
All right. See ya.
All right. Bye.